Welcome to the Progress Election Podcast. My name is Kiran Ramchandani.
And I'm Sachin, Shah.
And we are both former Harrow councillors and cabinet members. And we have just completed our challenge of campaigning in every single London borough. So we've been to 2 London boroughs in the last few weeks.
It's been a real challenge, but we got there and then we met some amazing people along the way.
Yeah, it's been absolutely fantastic. And we have learnt a lot, and we've seen a lot about what's happening in London. And today we are going to focus on the Reform vote and tell you a little bit about what we saw and what we understood.
Reform are doing well across the whole of London. We're seeing them do well, particularly in outer bits of London. So Hillingdon, Havering, Bromley and Bexley, a little bit of Enfield to the north, and then bits elsewhere. So across this podcast, we're going to be hearing from the deputy leader of the Labour group in Hillingdon, the leader of the Labour group in Bexley, can hear from their point of view and understand what's happening across London. What's quite interesting in the discussions we're having and what we're seeing on the doorstep is that we're getting reform support not just from a white working class, it's not just a red wall issue, but we're seeing a large bit of the demographic in London, particularly ethnic minorities, and within that, often Indian, Sri Lankan, subcontinent Indians, not only just supporting reform, but are actually in Harrow, are making up most of the candidates.
Yeah, that's true. And to just talk about what we are hearing on the doorstep, as we all know, a lot of people who are considering voting reform are talking about immigration. I've lost count of the number of times I've heard the phrase small boats on the doorstep. So a lot about illegal immigration, but also people are just unhappy with how things are working or not working. You know, they're fed up with seeing litter on their streets, potholes. And this is really a protest against people really not feeling satisfied in their lives. And cost of living crisis is having a major impact, and people feeling that their lives year on year were really not improving, and in some case getting worse. And I think people are fed up, they're frustrated, and they're looking to a different party and to a different leader to change the system.
Yes, we have to, as much as in the Labour Party we think of reform only about immigration, for many people out there, they feel that reform is the smash the system, start again. And that's because people feel like the system hasn't worked for them for so long. 14 years of Tory austerity, going back all the way to the credit crunch. All of that makes people feel that systems not working for them, and reform seem to be providing an answer that they want to hear.
Yeah, and I think there's a discussion in the wider Labour movement as to how much we should be panicking and worried about reform. Their poll ratings do seem like they're past their peak. We know that they're going to do well in the locals. They're starting from a very low base. But, like the conversation that we had in our last podcast about the Greens, should we be panicking, or should we just be focusing on the good work that Labour's doing locally?
It's really interesting that we have to really think hard about what constantly thinking about reform and Greens does to our ability to get our message. In government, we've done some great things, across the whole of the 2 years we've been in government, and local councils, Labour-run councils are doing some fantastic things. And we're seeing that in our canvassing. We're talking about the homes they're built. We're talking about the jobs they're created. We're talking about Renters' Rights Act. We're talking about Employment Rights Act. And if we're always constantly worrying about Greens and reform, we don't get a chance really to focus on that message.
Yeah, that's true. But where we're seeing a lot of the reform votes coming from in outer London are where we don't run the councils. In places like Bexley, where you had a fascinating conversation with the leader of Bexley, where he talks about the reform there. The reform vote there? Shall we have a listen?
Yes, let's do that.
I get annoyed because Bexley, over all my time, has been expected. When I was a parliamentary candidate, I was told to go elsewhere. When I was GLA candidate, I was told to go elsewhere. In council elections in the past, don't bother with Bexley, go here. If we keep doing that, we're never going to win anywhere else. Now, I have been to other constituencies. I have been to other councils that some of my colleagues have. But I just, to me, if you just give up on an area, then, do we really want reform to get a big foothold in London? Do we want that to happen? I don't think any Labour council in London wants reform to get anywhere in London, but that's the reality. And bearing in mind the mayoral election is only 2 years away, and you've got that dreadful woman who's standing for reform. That's the problem. If they start getting a foothold, they've got a base. They've got a way of campaigning in 2 years' time to win the mayoralty. And that to me is something that I think, this is not just about this election, it's about the future election and the general election in 29.
That was a really interesting discussion there by Stefano. It was really interesting to hear his point about foothold. I think that's absolutely right, that we don't allow reform to take ground from us, that we should be campaigning in and not allow them to get that platform.
Exactly. And when they have a platform, as we said earlier, the terms of the debate changes, and we bring in more division, and there's more hate in society. And we can have a listen to what Sital Punja, the deputy leader of Hillingdon Labour Group, told us about her experiences.
So our sense of reform in Hillingdon, I think the height of the flags and the kind of the momentum around reform was probably kind of like October, November last year. With all the marches that were going around the asylum hotels, and West Drayton was a prime example. So usually, where I'm a councillor in Useley, this was it was intense. I got racial abuse walking down the streets. I had to face it. I did a speech in council about the impact of the flags, and growing up in Luton where there was a BMP were massive, and what it was like as a child, and how do we really want that community back again.
And that was another really strong point from Sital there. Her point there about when reform and when immigration is strong, it leads to hate on the ground, is something that we've got to be really mindful of when we're discussing it both locally and nationally. And her point is shown by what happened in summer of 2024, just after the general election, when we had reform do very well and immigration was talked about a lot, and we had the riots just a couple of months later. And what that was, that was almost the political discussion allowed others who have strong views, who perhaps wouldn't have said anything before, perhaps felt they couldn't say anything, gave them permission to start talking. And we've got to understand that when hate comes into these discussions, it allows bad actors to do things.
Exactly. And it comes back to having the discussion on our terms and in line with our values. So let's have a look at where the reform vote is strong and how Labour's dealing with it. Behind Sachin, you can see all the leaflets that we've collected from our trips around London. And there's a running theme in those outer London boroughs where reform's strong around don't let reform divide us, don't let hate win. And what's really interesting is that there is a very strong anti-reform vote across London. Everywhere we've been, there's been a contingent of people saying anyone but reform. I think what's worrying now is that I'd say a year ago, the alternative was Labour, and people were saying, yes, I'm anti-reform, I'm going to stick with Labour. That seems to be changing now, and the anti-reform vote is going more to the Green Party. That's something we've covered in a different podcast.
Yeah. But what's really helped, actually, I think, again, and like we discussed last time, was this party. The party have changed the discussion, the script we have. So we get to really talk to people about who they don't want to win. And that allows us to, once you understand what people think and who they don't want to win, where there's a possibility of reform winning. And reality is when we ask people who they don't want to win, more times out of not, it is people saying they don't want reform. And we're able to use those discussions to have that squeeze message and say people, ultimately it's for them to decide how they vote. But we can say to them a vote for anyone other than Labour could lead to reform winning a seat.
Yeah, and the one campaign that is working so well on the doors, and I'm delighted that the Labour Party has introduced this policy, or the Labour government, is Pride in Place. And it's absolutely brilliant. And finally, we are regaining control of the narrative around the high street, around people taking ownership of where they live, having pride in their area, really understanding that things like rubbish, litter, potholes, that's a big issue. And that's something that annoys people in their day-to-day life.
Right.
And finally, we are taking that seriously. And I think we need to remember as the Labour Party that we do need to be there for everyone, and we need to listen to everyone's concerns. And I think sometimes as councillors, we get very drawn into, we must focus on the most vulnerable people, adult social care, children's social care. It's our absolute top priority. And yes, that's right. That needs to be. but it can't come at the expense of everything else. And we did some great work in Harrow with the campaign company on values modes, which basically splits the country up into settlers, prospectors, and pioneers, and basically says that depending on which category you're in, you have different concerns and a different way of looking at the world. And really smart policy making and smart campaigning is when you put policies forward and put your communications forward that targets all of those communities, so that we are saying to people that regardless of who you are, regardless of what your concerns are in your day-to-day lives, we are there for you. The Labour Party is there to govern for everyone. And it's similar to what you did as leader of Harrow Council, isn't it, Sachin?
Absolutely. I mean, I really had a focus when I was there. I had a phrase called little big things. And what that meant was little things make a big difference. Often councils are very good at talking about big things they're doing, children's social care, good Ofsted in CQC ratings and all those things. But what gets lost in that is people think, look, I just need my street light fixed. And those little things can make a big difference. And that's where Pride in Place is such a really important part of actually focusing on the little things, a set of money and a project that focuses on things that might seem small, but make a big difference to people's lives. And when we're out in Bexley, we're able to talk not only about the Labour government's Pride in Place funding, but the fact that it was a 10-year plan and there'll be things happening over the next 10 years. And it really gave people a sense that people care about the place. And that's really an important way of dealing with people's concerns about reform, which, while come on about immigration, can often be a feeling of decline locally as well.
Exactly. And it's that ownership as well. So it's giving people agency to decide what happens with that money and how that money is spent locally. And again, I think a lot of that reform vote comes from people feeling like they don't have control anymore of what's happening in their local community. And I also think, particularly when we're increasing council tax year on year, we have to show as councils, we have to show that we are delivering
Absolutely.
on services that are important to people, and people need to feel that they're having value for money.
And we've seen the party start to attack those narratives quite well. So it was the case that the party was a bit concerned about if you attack reform, people might see that as attacking reform voters. It's absolutely not. And it started with Keir's conference speech in September last year, where he called out some of the comments of reform councillors and candidates, all the way through to the party election broadcast we had, where the words of some reform candidates showed what they were saying.
Yeah, and I think flags has also been a bit of an issue for us in the Labour Party, and what our position on flags should be. Again, you had a great conversation with Stefano, the leader of Bexley, for his view on flags.
Yeah. Yes, let's listen to that.
I hate it when people from whatever side of let's say on the right of politics, accuse the Labour Party, us. Now, we put out strong statements saying they should be removed straight away. I hate it when those people from the party say we're not patriotic. How dare you say we're not patriotic? I've got an Italian father. I'm very proud of my Italian roots. I'm very proud of the United Kingdom. And this is George's flag. Football is one of the times, we get those flags out and festoon them across our houses and etc. The flag is a very important symbol of patriotism. It is not a symbol of nationalism, division, and hate. And, if people understand the history of St. George's and understand the history of the Union flag, if I was Welsh, I'd be really annoyed with that Union flag because where's the Welsh flag in that? But, the people who put these flags up are the same people or descendants of the same people that had the National Front bookshop in Welling. These are the same people that went around the borough dumping cars and putting racist messages on them 24 years ago. These are the same people that stood as candidates and nearly won a council seat by 8 votes. These are the same people that are putting these flags up and festooning them. And forget about what it is. If somebody attached a pallet board with an advertisement on it, that person would be prosecuted if we could find out that person was. If someone's put an unauthorised message or vandalising, it's vandalism of council property, which has damaged council property, which costs council taxpayers money.
And that was a really interesting take from Stefano. He's absolutely right. Labour Party is a patriotic party, and we shouldn't let people say that we're not. All we're saying, what we want to do is make sure the flag is something that unites us and not divides us. And if it's done properly, as you said, where there are opportunities to bring the flag in in council events in a way that brings people together. The Labour Party should absolutely do that and embrace that.
Exactly. It's not about the flags. The flags are great. It's the intention behind the flag.
Absolutely.
And I think it comes back to, we need to be really clear in how we campaign, how we govern, that it's in line with our values. And, coming back to that point that Labour can be there for everyone. We're not handpicking different types of voters that we're there for. We are there for everyone, regardless of who they are.
Absolutely. So we've seen Reform do well in the Red Wall. We're seeing Reform do well in London. But there's real opportunity for Labour through the Pride in Place and through the work that we're doing to see that threat down as we run up to the elections next week.
I hope you enjoyed our insights and our experience on the doors. See you soon.
Bye.